la famille.
Cool. So it's me again. So now we saw how you get to the point where you, sorry, my hair is a nightmare. How you get to a point where you have the first couple meetings, and now the question is what happens next. So as I mentioned, the biggest sort of issue at hand when you're raising early stage funds is information asymmetry. And what do I mean by information asymmetry? It's what I was talking about when I was talking about that curve. You want the deal to get done as quickly as possible, and you know the most about the business. The investor initially only has the deck plus a 20 or 30-minute phone call with you or a quick coffee. And so every week that passes, they get a bit more information about your business, your market, how you communicate with investors, et cetera, et cetera. And so what you want to do is to put as much pressure as possible on the round to push them to send that first term sheet and get to work. And what we mean by get to work is, initially they have some thesis about most markets. So they'll say, okay, I think that there is an opportunity in making it easier for retail investors to invest in stocks. And so if you come with them with a new way that makes it easier for retail investors to invest in stocks and that they like you as a founder, they'll probably say, okay, you know what, this is a on-hold investment opportunity. So I think it's interesting. I'm not going to do it yet, but I'm going to sort of monitor how it's going. And if the round gains momentum, then I'll do more work on it. And so you want to get to the point where they do more work on it. And doing more work means really investigating your team. So what did you and your co-founders do before, and speaking to a couple of people, doing user research, like actually using the product, speaking to a couple of users, having an idea of what the competition landscape is like, having an idea of what the fundraising landscape for that kind of business is like. And the only way that you push them to do that work is if they have the impression somebody else is going to be doing, is going to be doing the deal. And so, as I mentioned, and I'm sorry to be repeating this, but what you want to do is that, if you think about it, it does look like a video game in one regard, which is that what you're trying to do is to get to the next meeting. Usually the structure of these funds is that each partner has, or either the partners share a couple juniors that work for them, or each partner has their junior. But the junior will usually screen all of the deals. So you have to convince them that it's an interesting enough investment opportunity that he's going to bring, or he or she is going to bring it to his or her partner. Then the partner will do a meeting with you. Usually they have a slightly busier schedule. And so it'll take, a week to 10 days. So you want to show that good stuff has happened and that there's momentum in between those 7 to 10 days. Then you meet the partner. If the partner likes you, usually he'll have to speak about it in a partners meeting, or speak about it informally with his partners, and you'll have to meet that partnership, and they'll take another 7 to 10 days. And then you'll have a sort of investment committee, which will be another 7 to 10 days later. So all in all, you have 2, 3, 4 meetings to get through, each separated by a week on average. And so what you want to be doing is to be getting through those meetings, and how you get through those meetings and how you make those meetings in the shortest timeline possible is by creating a lot of outside pressure. There's essentially zero internal pressure in the round. The only pressure comes from the fact that somebody else will be doing the round, right? The price doesn't move. The amount of equity that you're selling doesn't really move in any given week. And so if you're trying to compress time in that regard, you need more people joining the round. And that's the reason why the first term sheet matters the most, because once you have that first term sheet, what you can do is that you can go back to every single person that you've spoken to in the round. So obviously people who told you I'll never invest in this business, or people that you really didn't like, you won't go back to, but anyone who you had a pretty good fit with, so you enjoyed speaking with them and they were a bit uncertain, or they didn't reach back to you, whatever the reason may be, now you have a reason to go back to them, because once you have a term sheet, there's essentially a deadline on the round. Before that, all the investors could afford to sort of play the ostrich and not really tell you. That was like a French expression, doesn't actually work in English, but all the other investors could afford to remain undecided and not give you a firm answer. Now that you have somebody saying, I'm willing to invest X at valuation Y within the next 30 days, you have a reason to go back to all the investors and say, okay, now's the time to shop. So sometimes there'll be clauses in the term sheet telling you that you can't go and shop. So that's why it's important to read what you are offered before you sign it. But often it's important. I mean, that is essentially the way that you go back to the market and see who actually wants to invest. And that's also when there's some movement on negotiation with regards to price. So price isn't everything, but it is one thing that matters. And so Usama and Baltazar mentioned it, but it's a lot easier to start with the lower price and increase the price than it is to start with a high price and decrease the price. And that goes back to what we were talking about earlier when we were talking about information asymmetry. If you go to the market and you say, I'm raising 2 million at 8 million euro valuation, and then you come back a few months later and you tell everyone, actually, I'm raising 1 million at 4 million euros valuation, what you're saying is that a lot of people decided to pass on your investment, in the previous months. And so you're giving the market more information about how competitor VCs view you. So it's the complete opposite of FOMO. Whereas if you start with 1 million at 4 million valuation, and then you get that term sheet and you go back to everyone and you say, okay, I have this person who's willing to invest 1 million at 4 million. Do you want to invest? And then they say, okay, I'm happy to invest on the same conditions. And then if there's one of them that you prefer, you can say, okay, well, listen, this guy is ready to pay a bit more, but I much prefer you. Can you match their offer, et cetera, et cetera. That's when you have the bargaining power to negotiate. Until you have one term sheet, you can't really put the pressure on everyone to say it's now or never, because that threat isn't really credible. The second that you do have that term sheet, the threat becomes credible all of a sudden. And then once you have more than one term sheet, now you have the possibility to negotiate a bit on price. But price isn't everything. And on average, I'd say that the founders who ended up optimizing for price didn't do as well as the founders who ended up optimizing for the right investor. And the right investor is somebody that they had a good fit with, and somebody who was experienced in investing in startups. And one of the reasons that matters is that there are a lot of issues that your company will face that are very specific to building a high growth company. And if you raise money, say from like a family office that usually invests in traditional industrial businesses, they might not be used to some of the risks or some of the trade-offs that you'll be facing as a startup. And that might put you in, honestly, pretty much existential risk. So prices and everything. Another thing that's important is that time is money too. So sometimes founders will get a term sheet, but for some reason their friends or their nemesis in university or some company that they raised about in TechCrunch raised at a much higher valuation than them. And so they get a term sheet for 1.5 million, that's 6 million valuation. And they say, there's no way I should be worth at least 10 million. And so they spend several weeks trying to find somebody who's willing to invest at that price. The thing is that there's a very big opportunity cost to fundraising. It's very time consuming, it's very energy consuming, it's very distracting, it's very hard to think about hiring and products and clients when you're spending all day repeating the same thing to investors. It sort of really limits your creativity. It has some merits, but it's also quite limiting in many regards. And so if you spend all those months trying to get a marginally better deal, more often than not, what you'll do is that you'll end up wasting those months, and sort of losing touch from the business. And it's much better to close around fairly quickly if you have people that you're happy with in conditions that are acceptable. Put that money to work, redirect your energy towards growing the business, and then coming back to the market a few months later or a year later, and sort of averaging out that valuation. And that's actually something that happens quite a lot. It's one of the very easy ways to be depressed if you read the tech press, is that you'll see these rounds these very big rounds. So you'll hear about a company that raised, it looks like it's an early stage company and they raised 15 million at 100 million. But what actually happened is that they raised 2 million at 4, and then 3 million at 12, and then 10 million at 100, and they just bundle everything up together and they say we raised 15 million at 100 valuation. And that means that it's actually very misleading, and you should probably not be benchmarking yourself against that. But that's the reality of how most of these seemingly high-priced rounds are actually done. And so you shouldn't be demoralized because it feels like the valuation right now is too low. There's always ways to increase it, and if you're growing the business, then you'll get a better deal the next round. So one of the things that's important when you're negotiating term sheets, and it's 20 minutes, so I can't go into too much technical detail. I can't go into too much technical detail about term sheets and clauses, and in addition to that, it's very boring and I'm not a lawyer. But there are a couple things that you should have in mind. I wrote them down here, and then you can have a look at them, or we can discuss them if there are any that are particularly interesting. But the two that I'd say are the two that are the most common and the most brutal are the ones that I put in 2 and 4. I don't know why I put them in 2 and 4 because of that, but so anti-dilution clauses are essentially clauses that say that if you raise at a lower valuation than the valuation that's currently being paid, then the investors get to essentially retroactively pay that price. So say that you raised at 10 million valuation, and then you have to raise a bit of money at 5 million valuation, then all the money they invested at 10 million valuation ends up being repriced at 5 million valuation. And there are a lot of reasons that that's unfair, but one of the biggest ones is just it creates an asymmetry between you and the fund. And so to the extent possible, you should be very wary of having that type of clause in your term sheets. And then the second one is tranches or milestone-based funding. So the reason that that's bad is that usually it creates a situation. So how does that work? Essentially, it works by saying, okay, we're going to invest 4 million in your business, but actually we're only going to invest 2 now, and then we're going to invest 2 million in the next 18 months if you manage to reach some milestone, so like 100,000 euros in monthly recurring revenue. And the reason why you probably don't want that is that that's an option that you would rather have than have the fund have. So instead of, and let me explain, if you actually manage to reach that milestone, it's likely that you can get a much better deal than the 2 million that they're offering from the market. And so you'd rather be in a position where you can go back to the market and fundraise for either more than 2 million or for 2 million at a better price. And in the reverse situation, if you don't reach it, usually they won't actually give you the money. So either it's tranched with this milestone and they won't give you money because you didn't reach the milestone, or there isn't the milestone, but they'll still find some reason not to give you the money because you're not progressing the way you want to. And so what actually happens is that you get the money if you don't want it, and if you want the money, you don't get it. And so to the extent possible, that's probably the sort of clause that you want to be avoiding. And then one last point before we get to the end of it, and this is something that the best fundraising entrepreneurs always do, is that you keep the pressure on until the money's in the bank. So it's not just a question of, so there's one thing which is like, if the money's in the bank, you shouldn't be leading on funds about the fact that you're still fundraising for this round. But especially if you're in if you're building a business that's pretty capital intensive, it's very likely that you'll need to fundraise again in the next 12 to 18 months. And a lot of the funds that you'll be speaking to, at least after seed. So for seed, usually there's seed specialists, but more and more now, a lot of the Series A funds also invest in Series B. And so it's very important that you keep, you keep interacting with them, because you'll probably be fundraising again from them in the next 12 to 18 months. And so during this process, it's important that you keep the pressure on until the money is in the bank, because until the money is in the bank, something can go wrong. And, it's sort of a common saying that in this industry, only the paranoid survive. And so if you sort of let your guard down before you've received the money, then something could go wrong. So it's important to keep all your options open until the money is finally wired and you have the money in the bank. But even outside of that, it's important that you keep building the relationship with the other funds, because even if they don't invest in this round, they might be very good candidates for the next one. Cool. And with that, I think we have a few minutes left for questions, and then you'll be doing networking.
Perfect, Matthias. Thank you very much. All right, so we have a lot of questions. I will read it, and if you can give us your answer. So maybe let's start with this one. How to get the first term sheet when no VC wants to do the first move? Any tactic? It's from Sam.
So there are several ways. Yeah, if you're doing it, sorry, it's just when you speak fast, your mouth gets dry. So if you're raising, so I'll assume that you're talking about an early stage round. So this is typically the first round. One of the things that works quite well is to, if no VC is expressing any interest, is to do what we call high resolution fundraising. So there's a really good article by Paul Graham of Y Combinator about high resolution fundraising. But essentially what that means is going to speak to angel investors for the most part, and raising in convertible notes from them. So, you know, if say you were looking to raise €1 million or 1.5 million euros, and you were looking for a VC to invest 1 million, well, maybe instead of raising 1.5 million as one block, you could raise it by going to angel investors and finding tranches of 150,000 or 200,000. And so you'll start with a valuation that's lower than the valuation you would have gotten from a VC. But because you do it by tranches, you can slowly increase the valuation, and you can get to an average which sort of resembles what you were looking to raise from the VC in the first place. And that way you can move ahead with the business. It's a bit more time consuming because it's a continuous process. So you're raising a bit now and a bit in 2 months and a bit 2 months later. But it allows you to raise some capital, put that capital to work, and then return to the fundraising market a few months later with some milestones achieved.
How much return on investment is enough for an angel and for investors? 1.5, 2.5?
I mean, honestly, so the way that most VCs are structured is that, or the way they model their funds is that they want any given investment to be able to return the fund. And so what that means is that any investment they make, so imagine they have 100 million euro fund and they invest 20 checks of 5 million. They want any of those 5 million euro checks to be able to be worth 100 million, right? So if you assume there's no dilution, that means 20. If you assume that they end up being diluted 2 times, that means that they need 40 times their investment in order to function as a business. So that's for the VC. When it's for an angel, it depends a lot more because it depends on their strategy. If they invest once in a while, and the reason that they're investing is because they really like you or they're interested in your industry, then maybe they care a bit less about the return because, you know, they're getting. But I can stop this. But the simple answer is just as much as possible, right? There's no sort of like upper bound on how much return they're looking for.
How many seed investors do the family founders talk to on average before raising a seed round?
How many investors? Yeah, so I think when it comes to VCs, it's usually 20, 30, 40, I'd say like 30 to 40 investors before you get a term sheet.
Jose, in the UK, I believe rounds don't need to close anymore, as there is seed legals process that allows to extend the time and start getting money earlier. Any thoughts?
So Seed Legal is actually a company in which we're investors, but and they've simplified, you know, they've simplified a lot of things for fundraising, but closing isn't so much a legal thing as it is a sort of symbolic milestones. So what we mean by, I mean, not symbolic, what we mean by closing is, okay, we set a target of raising 1 million and we reach 1 million in commitments. And so we sort of cash in that. What Seed Legals has allowed is they've made this financial instrument called convertible notes a lot easier to process. And so instead of waiting until you have everybody in the 1 million who agrees on everything, you can take the money as it comes, and instead of doing one big signing. But it hasn't changed the fact that you still need to get people to agree to invest in total 1 million euros or 1 million pounds.
Luis is asking, how much would you recommend a pre-seed startup to allocate for a BSPCE, employees pool option pool, sorry, and when should we do it?
So usual employee pools are like 10 to 20%, and you usually do it. I mean, when you start hiring, which if you're fundraising will usually happen about when you're raising the round, the first round. It's actually one of the things I didn't mention, but it's one of the ways in which you can play around with the valuation a bit.
Laure Doucet, who is an entrepreneur that I know, is saying, okay, so actually that is super clear, and I definitely get some answer on how to raise fund now. According to your presentation, on when to raise will come early 2021. So I'm anticipating right now with this event. What I really need to break my mental barrier about is about raising funds, because it's totally out of my comfort zone. What is my next move? Thanks a lot.
Great question. So I think, you know, it's important to sort of desacralize raising funds. So it's not like nobody's doing you a favor. So if you're raising funds, it's a deal like any other business deal. So, you know, if you sign a client for your business, you don't feel like you're doing them a favor or they're doing you a favor, right? You're building a product and they're paying for that product, or you're delivering a service and they're paying for that service. It's the same thing with investments. So if you're raising funds, the investor isn't doing anything for you, right? They're buying a stake in your company because they think it's a good deal, right? They think that at that price, they can make an interesting return. And so if you sort of manage to sort of flip that mindset and understand that there's no, like you're on an equal level and it's a transaction between two equals and not something that, you know, you're not like going to get something from superiors, it becomes a lot easier to think about investment. If anything, you know, you're selling them something that could be worth 10, 20 times more in a few years, right? So you're almost doing them the favor. It's just annoying that you need the money. If you could avoid needing their money, then you probably wouldn't even be speaking to them. So I think one of the things that you can do to sort of break that mental barrier is read. We have quite a lot of content about fundraising, and there's a lot of very high quality content out there about fundraising. And then the other thing is speak to a few people in your entourage that might have fundraised already, and you'll see that it's not, I mean, it's a complicated process sometimes, but it's not a sort of sacred one by any means.
All right, maybe we can take one or two last questions. Sam is asking, how long is it? How long is too long to fundraise a seed round?
Yeah, so so I would definitely say that 3 months of runway is a bit short. I'd definitely say it's too short for another reason, which is that even though the best investors won't put you in a position where they sort of leverage the fact that you have very little runway to renegotiate the deal, you don't want to be in that position, right? You don't want to be in a position where you desperately need the cash right now. And so you'll take any condition that they send your way, because even though that karma will end up biting the investor in the ass, it's quite likely, I mean, it's a possibility that that will happen to you. And so what we usually advise founders is that they should get on the market when they have sort of through 6 to 9 months, and closer to 9 than 6 if possible. That way they close their round when they have about 6 months left, and they have enough leverage to back out of a bad deal if needed.
All right. I think it's, okay, one last question. Hey, Usama is back in the place.
Everything is here? Yes. Okay.
So one last question. Is there any red zone when we go to investors? Any area where we should be extra careful? He's asking Nidish.
Usama, you're on mute. I don't know if you want to take it before I'm taking it. Okay. So, I mean, honestly, I think the important thing is just to have a good idea of people who've worked with the investor in the past. So a lot of the 5 things I mentioned, the 5 sort of clauses that I mentioned, are fairly technical, and I think that the market in most places has evolved enough that you don't need to look at them too closely. I mean, you need to look at them too closely, but you don't need to be too skeptical about it. The one thing that matters a lot is how those investors have behaved with founders in the past. And so in the same way that they're going to do some form of due diligence by asking your customers what they think about your product, you should be going to their sort of other partners, which are the other founders that they've worked with, and ask them how the investors behaved, if they're delivering on the value add that they mentioned, if they're not, if they come prepared to board meetings, if they have useful insights, whatever.
All right. Okay, Balthazar, if you're here, maybe you can click on the button, on the blue button, and join us. Like that, we are the 4 of us, and it's more cool if you hear me, Balthazar. Otherwise, I wanted to say that we are still 125 people all connected together right now. Hey, Bal. And that's really a cool thing. I mean, it's a pretty good proof that you guys have been interesting, providing a lot of very strong and useful ways to help people raise funds. So thank you for that. Thank you everybody for being here. And another interesting fact is that we had a lot of people from all over the world, not only from Europe actually. A lot of people from India. I don't know what time is it exactly right now. I think you are sleeping. You should be. But I'm really happy that you've been following this workshop. And we have also people from Peru, we have people from
1 a.m.
people from everywhere, from Lebanon. So it's a big thing for us to be able to address so many different nationalities. Any conclusion, my friends, before we start to do the chat roulette? Usama, you want to say a word? Some encouragement, maybe?
Yeah, maybe the most important thing to remember is that fundraising is just a tool, not an end, not a goal. Building a company is a real game. Being good at fundraising is like a cheat code, but it doesn't make the game more fun.
I love that. I love that. Matthias, a little conclusion. One last word to end up with.
Yeah, I think it's just like every time you get to know from investors, and as I mentioned, it'll usually be about 35 to 40 times when you're raising a round. Remember that the reasons that they're giving you for passing are probably false, and so you shouldn't put too much weight on those when you're moving on. And ultimately, the thing that matters most isn't how many investors decided to invest in your company, but how many people care about what you're building. So that's it.
And Balt?
Didn't listen.
Balt, come on. I want your last word. Like, what would you give as a conclusion for the people to keep working on their fundraising in the right mindset?
More money doesn't make you a better entrepreneur. It makes you a more mediocre entrepreneur. So focus on how you spend the money rather than how you raise the money.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, my friends. Thank you, everybody.